Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are super excited for our guest today. We're going to be talking about some adventure racing, if you call it that. We have Sunny Stroeer on our podcast. Thank you so much, Sunny, for joining us. We're super excited to dive into all things outdoor mountainous adventure conversation with you.
Thank you, Kyla, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are very excited. And for our listeners, if you're listening and not watching the Zoom version of this, Sunny's got a killer background on her Zoom right now. Sunny, you said that backdrop is a picture you took from
Aconcagua in Argentina, which is one of the 7 summits.
Amazing. Maybe we'll have time to talk a little bit about that. So as our listeners know, they've heard a bit of your bio already. Why don't we go straight into your two truths and a lie?
Okay, 2 truths and a lie. I got 3 factoids about myself, which are that I am terrible at stretching and injury prevention.
Okay.
I love training,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a lazy athlete.
Okay. Can't wait to hear about that. Okay. So it was terrible at injury prevention. What was the second one?
I love training.
Love training. I feel like that might be true. Okay. And last one.
And I'm a lazy athlete.
Lazy athlete. Ooh, some of these are like contradicting each other. Okay.
What's your guess?
I feel like you like training. I don't think you're a lazy athlete. I think the last one's a lie. I don't know, but that's all self-perceptive. Unless somebody called you a lazy athlete. I don't know. Based on what we've researched about you thus far, you do not sound like a lazy athlete.
Why, thank you.
I feel like that's the lie. What do you think, Amanda?
I'm thinking, I feel like can be common for somebody to be like bad at recovery and stretching.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So I'm gonna go, oh, but you said you were terrible at it.
Yeah. I feel like that's pretty common. Like even with my clients, nobody likes to do the like mobility stretching part of training.
Okay. I'll go with the lazy athlete as the lie also.
Okay. Don't tell us the answer yet, Sunny. We will reveal it and dive into all of these at the end of the episode here. So why don't you take us back a ways and let us kind of give us a little bit of a background of what took you from, our listeners heard it, you were Harvard MBA, busy job, turned mountain adventure athlete. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that happen?
That transition happened throughout my 20s, really, and it was very much unplanned and serendipitous in a lot of ways. I started running when I was in college, actually, and I ran primarily because it was cheap, it was easy and accessible, and I needed to do something to really just manage my weight and my fitness. I was spending a lot of time with my nose in books. I was spending a lot of time in the dining hall, and the freshman 15 certainly were a thing. So I was just looking for a way really to lose some weight and started putting miles down. And I ran my first half marathon right after I graduated college and thought that I was going to die. Promised myself that I'd never, ever do anything that's stupid or hard ever again.
Yeah.
And then I ran another half marathon the next year. And then I graduated to the marathon distance and still, didn't like it very much, to be honest. Didn't consider myself a runner at all. But by this time, I had started grad school, actually. I was getting my MBA from Harvard Business School. And I was starting to kind of delve into all sorts of adventure experiences, including rock climbing and then finally ultra running, which really just fell into my lap in a very, very strange way shortly after I graduated from business school. And remind yourself there that I'm still not considering myself a runner at this time, even though I'd completed marathons by then. But I got an opportunity to run an ultra marathon and did that as a non-runner. And by the time I finished, I was so in love with the psychological challenge of pushing myself in an extreme adventure that I was hooked and just kept going from there.
Amazing. Did you not get the psychological challenge with the half marathon distance and the full marathon distance?
I don't think I did, to be honest. There was certainly a component of psychological challenge associated with those distances. And I was much more focused on the actual performance and on, just trying to run fast, run well, hit certain times. And it was a very physical process for me and, difficult without question, but it really didn't allow me to kind of push into, I guess, the classic runner's high very much and didn't feel transformative the way the ultramarathon did. Now, the ultramarathon, I'll say, that was a 100-kilometer race that I essentially ended up running off the couch, and it took me just over 24 hours. And of course, my body was very, very unhappy with me trying to do something like that, more or less off the couch. And at the same time, it was such a deeply emotional and transformative experience that was the moment where I realized that the physical realm opened doors for me to personal growth and to emotional growth that I didn't even know existed until then.
Wow, amazing. So how did the ultra fall into your lap? Did like a friend convince you? Did you get a free entry? Like, how did this happen?
So I was volunteering in Madagascar actually for about
Wow.
8 weeks or so for a nonprofit shortly after I had graduated. And to be honest, that volunteer position was not very exciting. And my life setup was actually pretty difficult because one, I was broke. Two, I had a job that really wasn't grabbing me and wasn't keeping me engaged. Three, I was living in a situation, where I really didn't have much in terms of social connections. I didn't have, a nice environment. I didn't have a nice apartment. Everything felt dreary and drab and just not good. And at the same time, because I'm in Madagascar, Madagascar is a huge island. I'm based in the capital city of Antananarivo. I had no real option of getting out and experiencing, engaging kind of adventures or anything out of the ordinary, because in order to go anywhere, I was either going to have to pay for a flight, which I couldn't afford, or I was going to have to spend 12 hours one way on a bus to go somewhere, but I was working Monday through Friday, so I just couldn't do that.
Wow.
Right. So long story short, I fell in with this group of expats who were runners, and they invited me to tag along to a fully organized, everything logistics setup type of adventure that my boss, by the way, was also going on at the time. And it was going to be 5 days with a van going to one of the national parks in Madagascar and, showing up for this race and then coming back to Antananarivo. And I said, wow, I really, really, really want to do that. Amazing. So I decided to join. And at that time, that expat group, the folks that were in it were asking me, okay, so what do you want to do if you come down there with us? Do you want to, spectate? Do you want to go hike? Do you want to volunteer at an aid station? And I was like, well, I've run marathons, might as well go and run the race if I go through the trouble of actually going there. And they were a bit skeptical, as were most of my friends and family, with, full justification.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I was looking at the race distances and I figured that I should have a shot at maybe doing this because there was a 25K, a 50K, and a 100K. The 25K had a 4-hour cutoff. The 50K had a 12-hour cutoff, and the 100K had a 36-hour cutoff. So I'm like, every time the distance doubles, the time triples. 100K or 60 miles in 36 hours, that's not even 2 miles an hour. That's less than walking pace. Well, that should be achievable, right?
Yeah.
So I did.
Amazing. And you finished before the cutoff, I imagine?
I finished with actually a lot of time to spare. I think I ended up being the 4th or 5th placed woman, finishing in just over 25 hours, I think.
Wow.
Which, now in retrospect for 100K is very, very slow, but it was a difficult course and I had no idea what I was doing. I was literally Googling how to run an ultramarathon before showing up for this race. So yeah, I was pretty happy with myself.
Wow. And what year was this in?
This was in 2011.
Okay. What was nutrition hydration? Was there even a thought about it when you're going into this?
Oh, it was terrible. So to take you back there, Kyla, in 2011 in Madagascar, first up, I had shown up on the island of Madagascar without any running gear because I wasn't planning on running since I wasn't a runner. So I didn't have running shoes. I didn't have a running pack. I didn't know yet that hydration bladders were a thing, right? So to me, water or hydration came in bottles, and I
Mhm.
didn't know that you could actually go and have a bladder with you, let alone, carry
Wow.
that in a nicely fitted running pack. And it was just bad on all sorts of levels. And the race also ran out of water because it was hike in aid stations only in the latter part of the course, and things were rationed, and it wasn't well run, and yeah, it was really, really difficult.
Yikes. Oh man. And how did your body feel through that event?
Terrible.
Oh,
Absolutely terrible. I
yeah.
mean, I remember we started at 2 a.m, middle of the night. And by the time the sun rose, I think I was already starting to be dehydrated and probably way behind on my nutrition, because I don't even know if I carried anything with me, for in between aid stations. I don't remember.
Wow.
But I had no idea about how to approach any of this. And, throughout that day, I remember that I, was really, really, really dehydrated. I was bordering heat exhaustion.
Wow.
And yeah, my body was very unhappy with me.
Yeah, that is certainly some like mental willpower that has to come into play there
Yeah.
with the lack of hydration and nutrition on board for sure. So, what kind of sports are you have a vast experience in different sports. You mentioned rock climbing and ultra running and, well, I mean, I think there's some mountaineering stuff going on as well, right? So what kind of sports are you currently involved in right now?
I'll say that my primary passion and focus is what I call VLDs, very long distances.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that just means I'm kind of zeroed in on endurance, and I don't necessarily have a preference of what shape that endurance takes. Though I don't like wheels, I don't really enjoy bikes, but I have
You're
done some
breaking
of
my
that as
heart.
well. I know, I can't do it. I've tried,
Yeah,
but there's a
it's all
story in that
good.
as well. But yeah, in general, either foot endurance or running or hiking,
Hmm.
or most recently skiing in the Iditarod.
Yeah.
But really anything that takes me way out there for a long period of time.
Wow, amazing. So, okay, you mentioned the Iditarod. I definitely want to dive into that. So can you tell us a little bit, and for our listeners' sake too, like what is the Iditarod? What's the distance? How does the race work? How did you participate in the race? That kind of stuff.
So the Iditarod is best known as a dog sled race, the last great race on Earth in Alaska, which covers about 1,000 miles from the area around Anchorage all the way up to
Wow.
Nome. Of course, that's not the race that I participated in. I participated in the Iditarod Trail Invitational, which is the human-powered counterpart to that race. So every winter, about a week before the dogs and the mushers start their race,
Mm.
there is a small handful of relatively motivated and somewhat crazy individuals that line up near Anchorage to try and do all of this under their own power, either on foot, on a fat bike, or on skis.
Mm.
And to make things even more complicated, there are two different distances. There is a
Mm.
350-mile version, and then there's the long distance, which is 1,000 miles. And that's what I just completed this past March.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so okay, so many things to talk about with that. So 1,000 miles on skis. Are you towing like something a sled behind you that has your stuff?
I did have a sled, and one of the interesting things about the Iditarod is that there is really no mandatory gear list, and there's
Mm.
also no one size fits all approach to, what you carry and how you carry it. So I had actually competed in the shorter version of the Iditarod Trail Invitational. I'll refer to it as ITI because that's
Hmm.
easier. So I competed in the short version of the ITI 3 times prior on skis and
Wow.
on fat bike, and I'd done it just carrying a pack. I'd done it, just pulling a sled with skis. And for the long distance 1,000-mile race this year, I decided to have both a backpack and a sled so that I could move weight back and forth between the two.
Wow. How much weight do you think you started with?
I started with around 43 pounds. I was trying really hard to keep it below 40, but didn't quite manage.
Yeah.
And I think there were some sections where I ended up carrying closer to 50 pounds because there were stretches where there weren't any resupply, so I had to carry a lot of food.
Wow. Goodness. Okay, I have so many questions. How long does it take you to ski towing a sled and a pack 1,000 miles in
In,
Alaska climate?
in my case, it took me 29 days, 22 hours and 6 minutes. And that's significant because the race cutoff is 30 days. And there had
Wow.
been many, many people attempting to complete the 1,000-mile course on skis within that race over the last about 2.5 decades. And nobody had managed yet until this year. Now, this year, I snuck in just under the cutoff, becoming the first
Wow.
woman to do this. And then there were 4 men that finished between, I think, 4 days to 4 hours ahead of me, who became the first
Wow.
people to go and do this.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations. That is like
Thank you.
incredible. 29 days. So, so many nutrition questions. Like there's a couple stops where you can resupply. Are these like what I think of like in a typical race, like your aid stations, or how are these set up or are they? And what kind of stuff are you able to restock with from a nutrition lens?
There is a mix of aid stations and just drop boxes, essentially, that you're
Mm,
mailing ahead to yourself, drop
gotcha.
bags or drop boxes.
Hmm.
And then you're also able to go and purchase, additional meals from any kind of publicly available sources along the trail. So this isn't relevant everywhere, of course, because if you're skiing from Anchorage to Nome, you go through big stretches of terrain where there's nothing, but you also cross through a couple of native villages. You actually have a couple of like hunting and fishing lodges, that sort of thing, B&Bs who may sell
Wow.
meals.
Hmm.
But yeah, so the quality of the nutrition that you're able to get is really very much dependent on what you pack yourself
Yeah.
and how diligent you are about trying to find access to good external sources.
Wow. So with the temperatures being as cold, I imagine you're on skis, you're in the snow. What type of nutrition worked best for you, or how did you, I guess, prevent that from freezing so you could eat it?
Freezing is a huge challenge out there, both for water or any other hydration and for nutrition, of course. So what I did most of the time during the days, and when I say during the days, that's really a loose term because I frequently start skiing, before dawn and ski
Right.
long into the night. But while I was moving, I relied on sports nutrition very heavily. I
Mm.
used to work with Goo Energy Labs
Oh,
and
nice.
ended up doing a lot of their products, particularly their chews as well as
Mm.
their gels. And I just try and keep those on my body to keep
Yeah.
them warm. And the chews in particular are really nice because, they're bite sized. And so even if they're frozen, you just thaw them in your mouth and you're
Yeah.
fine. But it's definitely a continuous concern.
Wow. Yeah. And in Alaska, is this winter that this is happening? Or you said March. So yeah. Okay. So what's the daylight hour like? Is it short, pretty short still?
It's interesting because it changes throughout the event because it's a month-long event.
Right.
Starting out in the last weekend of February, I think daylight hours are somewhere around 11 and a half hours a day or so. And then
Okay.
by the time I finished, much further north up near Nome, I think I had somewhere around 14 to 15 hours of daylight. So
Okay.
yeah, it really changed.
Do you feel like that made a difference in your, I guess, like attitude to get up and move, or by the end was your body pretty tired?
It made a huge difference. I mean, I was
Oh,
definitely tired without a
yeah.
question because, you may think that, okay, this is an endurance race, so you should be moving pretty fast. So, how hard can it be to cover what 30, 40, 50 miles a day? But
Yeah.
my average speed was, I think, 2.3 miles an hour.
Wow. Yeah.
So, if you think about that, when I was covering 40 or 50 miles a day, I was out there for, 16, 20 hours.
Yeah. Wow.
And the daylight hours certainly made a difference just psychologically because it was super nice for me to be able to, go and pull into kind of my next bivvy spot or my next village still
Hmm.
in daylight without needing a headlamp.
Yeah.
And, that was a huge mental relief.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I've heard different stories about that too, with people doing ultra distance, not 30 days or 29 days worth of ultra, much shorter, but how the time of the year makes a big difference of when they choose to do that event. So yeah, yeah, the sunlight, it's our bodies like sunlight,
Yeah.
certainly. And were you sleeping like outside in the snow, or like camping, or are you able to find like bed and breakfast or places like that along the way that you're allowed to stand?
It was a mix of both. And, in general, I'd say that there were villages typically every, about 40 to 150 miles.
Okay.
So depending on how you strategized,
Yeah.
there was a lot of indoor access, but it wasn't a given in
Right.
any point. And then there were long stretches, but it was nothing. So
Wow.
I ended up spending, I believe, 5 nights out of the 29 or 30 nights that I spent out in the open. And the other 24, 25 nights, I was able to get indoors.
Wow.
Sometimes I was into, a heated building, and sometimes I was into a wall tent that was an aid station provided by
Yeah.
the race. And
Wow.
then there were probably 5 or 6 other occasions where I'd find access to a shelter cabin. That's a publicly accessible shelter cabin.
Mhm.
So, even though that's a structure and protected from the wind, those shelter cabins are cold
Yeah.
unless you can cut wood and find wood to go and start a fire,
Right.
which on the shore, on the northern part of Alaska is not necessarily a
Yeah.
given. So yeah,
Right.
it may have been indoors, but it was still very, very difficult and very cold.
Wow. What was gear like? I mean, how many layers are you wearing? Were you able to stay comfortably warm, or were you pretty cold at all throughout?
It was a mix of really everything because I had temperature swings upwards of 80 degrees throughout the race. So my
Wow.
low temperatures were below -50, and
Oh,
my high temperatures were in the mid 30s.
oh, wow.
Which, both of those are very, very difficult. Definitely from a skiing perspective, because cross-country skis, I just learned this myself. I'm not much of a cross-country skier, but apparently cross-country skis really only work well in, temperatures from like 25 degrees down to -10. If it's colder than
Oh,
-10, they don't glide well. And if it's warmer than 30, they definitely don't glide well. So,
interesting. Oh,
um,
wow. That's,
yeah.
yeah, fun fact. I would not know that either. I'm not a skier. Is that because it gets like too icy or too hard packed when it gets too cold, or?
Yeah, when it's really cold, essentially you just end up having these very, very hard surfaces, and it's a little bit like a light version of Velcro. And
Mm,
then when it gets warm, your skis will start icing up, and you end up developing these huge clumps of snow on the bottom of your
oh,
skis. And as soon as that happens, you're not going anywhere. It's essentially like
right.
you're walking with breads with boards
Yeah.
on your feet. My German heritage is coming through here. Um, so yeah, when it's warm,
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. And I imagine that's like heavy too, like ways you're expending more energy.
Oh, it's
Um,
heavy and it's terrible because you have zero glide at that point. And so not only is it heavy and it's uncomfortable, but you're also developing blisters because, your feet are now moving inside your boots versus the skis moving on snow.
yeah. Oh man. With kind of the nutrition target, or did you, I should say, did you have a nutrition target? Was there talking about the goos and the gels and stuff like that? Were you trying to get in so much per day? Were you basing it off of more of how you felt? How do you stay on top of fueling yourself in that day-to-day distance?
I have learned a lot about nutrition and hydration since that first race in 2011. So yes, I did have, some form of a strategy, and I had loose targets. I didn't necessarily, say, okay, that I needed 3,500 calories a day on me or, whatever it might have been. But I was trying to budget pretty loosely that I would have access to 3,500 to 4,000 calories a day, and then try to supplement that with as much as possible around the resupplies that I brought myself.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest goal was to stay on top of calories as much as possible. One of my secret
Yeah.
superpowers as an athlete is that I can always eat, and I love to eat.
Awesome.
So I didn't really count calories, but I was trying very, very hard to, take in what I consider a unit. So a gel,
Mhm.
a bar, a bag of chews, whatever it might have
Mhm.
been, every 3 miles,
Nice.
and to then load up on as much as I could when I had aid stations or I had B&Bs or places where I could
Yeah.
buy food.
Nice. What was some of the like other food options that you would get from the aid stations or your like drop zones or drop bags, that kind of stuff?
My favorite food probably for that entire race was an aid station in Nikolai, which is at like mile 300 or so, or yeah, somewhere around there.
Mhm.
Um, it was an aid station in a local village manned by the ITI, and I ended up getting double cheeseburgers with bacon,
Oh,
which
nice.
was absolutely wonderful. There was a whole pizza involved at the short finish line in McGrath.
Wow.
Actually, there's a story behind that. One of my drop bags had gotten lost at the short finish line, and I was one of the very final racers in the field. So, at this point, the aid station is breaking down, and everybody else's stuff had already gotten distributed and kind of,
Oh no.
donated or whatever else. So there was literally no more food to be had except for what the race volunteers and the race director had for themselves, which included a large family style frozen pizza that they ended up making for me and then sending out onto the course with me so that I'd
Wow.
have food for the next couple of days. So
Amazing.
yeah,
Wow. Goodness. That's wild to lose that. Oh gosh, that's gotta be like,
yeah,
yeah, all the things that can go wrong during a race. Gosh.
yeah.
And what about fluids? Like, how were you targeting for that during like each day?
I did not do as well on the fluids
Mm,
as I did on the food.
mm,
So in general, my goal was to consume about 2 liters a day,
mhm.
which, for 40 to 50 miles is not very much.
Yeah.
And but that was my budget for while I was moving, because one of the challenges, of course, is that you're in extremely cold temperatures. You have to make sure that things stay liquid.
Mhm.
And if things aren't staying liquid, then you have to go and get out your stove and you have to melt snow for water, which takes a
Right.
lot of time and takes additional fuel, which is additional weight. So I was really
Yeah.
trying to make it from checkpoint to checkpoint, and then you don't want to be carrying 3, 4, 5 liters, well, maybe 3 liters. But the more you carry, the heavier things get, the slower you
Right.
are, the more calories you burn, right? So it's a bit
Yeah.
of a catch-22. Yeah, so on the hydration side, I didn't do as well, but I was able to make do with those 2 liters most of the time. And then again, I was trying to really, kind of load up at the indoor opportunities at the aid stations. And I probably ended up drinking somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5 liters a day.
Wow. Nice. That's great. And any electrolytes you're adding in there? Is that like goo brand stuff or how are you replenishing there?
I did have some Guru Octane mix,
Mhm.
which, is electrolytes and calories. I didn't end up using that consistently for 2 reasons. One of them is that actually, as you use those electrolyte mixes, they make your liquids more likely to freeze in extreme cold temperatures.
Oh,
So that was
interesting.
one thing. And then the other challenge was that, in all honesty, it was a chore just having to prepare those drinks, even though it's so easy,
Yeah.
just pour it into the bottle. But every little bit mattered
Yeah.
towards particularly the second half of the race when I was running on, 3, 4 hours of sleep a night. And so frequently I'd just be like, yeah, I don't care about that. I'm just going to take water and really try to dial it in on my actual solid
Right.
nutrition.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, goodness, like even to open those packages I mean, are you having to take off your gloves and then your fingers are freezing or, all
Yeah,
of
in
that?
general, I would only do that at indoor opportunities. I
Yeah.
never tried to go and mess with any of that while I was out on the course.
Yeah.
I did actually, I was relatively good about packing ramen
Oh,
and
nice.
using, a big kind of, hot thermos of ramen as one of my
Hmm.
liquid meals. And
Nice.
that, of course, same thing, you end up having to prepare it, and then it ends up freezing, and all of those things. But I found that if I prepared that first thing in the morning and then had about a liter of ramen fortified with freeze-dried butter, actually is what I put in there,
Ooh.
that allowed me to have a nice kind of very hydration rich lunch snack as well,
Yeah.
and get some sodium in.
When you add, so you freeze dry, did you say freeze dried butter?
Hmm.
I don't even know what that consistency would look like. Did it make it less likely to freeze by adding fats into it? No. Oh,
It
shoot.
actually makes it more likely to freeze, I think, but it
Oh,
just added calories and it added
yeah.
fats, and I wanted that. So
Yeah.
in general, with the foods that I prepared, including that ramen, I was trying to be really, really good about adding calories wherever I could. And typically, because I wanted them to be lightweight, right? It was a lot of freeze-dried butter in meals where I could stomach that. And
Yeah.
then it was chia seeds and, a
Mm.
couple of other meals. And that was what made it really heart-wrenching, actually, when some of my resupplies didn't show up, because I'd spent so much time, really trying to prep all of that and really
Mm.
get dialed on what I was going to eat. And then I ended up just
Mm.
scavenging and eating whatever I could find, which wasn't
Wow.
ideal.
Yeah. Goodness. Do you feel like that resupply set you back at all in terms of your finish time?
I don't know if it set me back in terms of my finish time. It certainly added stress,
Yeah.
and it wasn't the only resupply that I missed. So there were another 2 or 3 boxes that ended up not showing up. And actually on the first one that was missing, which is the one that I talked about at the short finish line,
Yeah.
that one was particularly stressful because I was the last racer in the field at this point. There wasn't anybody else behind me. And I was coming up on this extremely remote stretch of about 200 miles until the next village, 200 miles until the next resupply point. Now, in the middle of those 200 miles, there was an airdrop that the race had provided for us where you could have your own drop bag flown in.
Mm-hmm.
And I had messed that up in my race prep. So I didn't have a drop bag at the, middle mark of the 200-mile stretch, which is why I had sent more supplies to myself to the short finish line at mile 350. And then that's what went missing. So, did it impact my nutrition strategy? For sure.
Yeah.
Did it set me back with my race time? Probably not. I ended up doing pretty well with calories, but it was just a really, really big kind of added stressor.
Yeah, goodness. So 200 miles without your planned nutrition, that ends up adding up to 4 or 5 days of like having to change your nutrition plan and hydration, I imagine too, maybe.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was 5 days. And again, it worked out fine because the race director and the volunteers were really amazing, and they just rallied behind me and were like, listen, we know that your drop bag was here a couple of days ago and now it's not. We want to make sure that you have what you need to continue this race. We're not going to let you drop out because you don't have calories. So we'll find whatever food you need. And they sent me out that pizza, as I said. They actually baked a whole tray of brownies and sent those with me. So I had all these like very alternative race foods. And then the Iditarod sled dog race was kind of right at the same spot at the same time. They were just going through a desolate stretch.
Nice.
So I was seeing a lot of mushers as well as their support teams. And I wasn't shy about telling people, I'm really worried about my calories. I don't know if I'll have enough food to go and make it to the next village. And so that news kind of traveled up and down the Iditarod dog sled teams. And they ended up giving me food and ended up actually rallying and putting a little resupply together for me for that, middle mark drop that I missed.
Amazing. Wow. Are you like with the sled dogs going by, does that help at all to like follow in the trail that they create?
The sled dogs are really, really important for the ITI because you're right, there is a really good trail usually that gets put in specifically for the dog race. Now, that trail is variable depending on weather. If it's snowing, if there's wind, it may get blown over, it may get obliterated, but they're trail breakers that try to, stay just ahead of the lead dogs. And so usually if you're in proximity of the dogs, you have good progress.
Nice.
So yeah, that was really helpful.
Wow. Yeah. Goodness. So all in all, I mean, it sounds like so many different challenges were thrown at you, but I mean, you said did you say first female ever to finish the 1,000? I mean, incredible, like, wow. So what do you do after that? Like, how do you recover your body after that?
Well, since we're talking about nutrition, to be completely honest, lots and lots of donuts.
Just carbs.
My body was just craving sugar and carbs. And I am usually, I do have a sweet tooth here and there, but I'm not a donut person. I think I was eating up to like 8 donuts a day after I came back from the race. So, in general, I was really happy with maybe not my nutrition strategy, but with my brute force approach of just eating as much as possible, because I only lost about, I believe, 10 to 12 pounds in the race.
Wow.
And, there are other folks that lose 20, 30, 35 pounds, which ends up being critical. So I was really happy with not losing a ton. However, what I did lose, I very quickly gained back in the next 5 to 6 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good. Did you, in preparation for the race, did you intentionally try and put on weight before? I've heard of athletes doing that too.
I think there are a lot of folks, who do polar adventures that do that. I did not intentionally put on any weight because I generally am not super cut and I carry some extra calories with me. So I felt like, that already is one of my natural advantages for these long endurance races. But I certainly had a very, very high priority of trying to lose as little weight as possible. And whenever I had a chance at checkpoints at aid stations, I weigh myself and I try to stay on top of where I was and, see how much I was losing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they do have scales for you to check. No?
Not
Good to find
everywhere,
one.
but there were a couple of B&Bs that
Mm.
just kind of had them as part of their B&B setup. And there was
Oh,
actually
okay.
a school in the later portion of the race that also happened to have a scale available. And so I'd jump on that. And,
Yeah.
early on, I was like, oh, sweet, I've only lost like 6 pounds. This is great. And then I got into the last 200 miles and I was, south of the -10 mark. And I'm like,
Mm.
just
Yeah.
eat more food.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, those are good little reminders too, if you have those opportunities to hop on that scale, like you're saying. So interesting. And then with all that, yeah, stress on the body and nutrition that's being taken, it would be so interesting to see too, like what is that composition that like obviously a lot of glycogen storage, I would imagine, but like, are we losing a good amount of muscle through that? I wonder too. I
Man,
bet.
I have no data, but I'm willing to bet that, that's exactly what's going on. I mean,
Yeah.
so the data that I do have, I use a Whoop strap to,
Mm-hmm.
track kind of my recovery and my body metrics. And what that was telling me was that most days I was burning, between 4 and 5,000 calories a day,
Wow.
which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And, on the flip side, my sleep was nowhere near where it needed to be, of course, because I was getting anywhere between 3 and 6 hours a night, which is not enough with
Wow.
that sort of effort.
Yeah. Goodness. Did you see any wildlife out there?
I did. I saw, thankfully, no moose. Moose are
Oh,
dangerous. Don't want to run into those. I
yeah.
had encounters in previous years, but not this year.
Oh,
But
good.
I did see a wolverine.
Oh, whoa. That's cool.
And I was really excited because, so I'm from Germany originally, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't move to the US until I was a teenager, almost
Hmm.
20. And when I first learned about, Wolverine, I was a character in X-Men. I
Oh,
didn't understand that it was an actual animal until I started racing in
yeah.
Alaska and people were starting to talk about Wolverines. And I'm like, wait, they're real? And
Yeah.
I got to see one. So that was super cool.
Oh, that's awesome. And no, oh my gosh, I'm going to sound really uneducated if I ask this. Are there polar bears in Alaska? Or is it just
Yes,
grizzly bears?
there are grizzly bears
Okay.
and polar bears.
Oh, okay, cool.
Grizzlies typically aren't a concern for this race because it's too early in the season for them to come out of hibernation, even though
Mm,
racers occasionally do see tracks.
mm,
Um, Polar bears could potentially be a big concern. And
mm.
in theory, the last like 100 miles or so of the course are in what, land managers consider polar bear terrain. But I
Oh,
guess they're so rare in that
mm,
area. They typically, spend time further up north
hmm.
that when I asked race veterans about their polar bear concerns and strategies, I just got laughed at. So yeah,
Oh,
not really a
okay.
concern.
That's good. So you don't have to carry like bear spray. Did you have to carry that? No. Would it even work in that cold of temperature?
So I don't know if it would. Interestingly enough, the big concern out there really, it's not bears, it's not wolves, it's not wolverines, it is moose. And moose
Yeah.
are a big issue and they attack racers, pretty regularly. They attack the mushers and their dog teams regularly. Actually, this
Oh,
year, the winner ended up having to kill a moose on the trail and so they carry guns, the mushers, right?
yeah.
Because the moose was attacking his dog team.
Oh no.
And it's up to everybody individually in the ITI what we want to do about that.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, I don't carry weapons and I just kind of hope for the best. And I've had run-ins with moose before where I've just
Yeah.
tried to, evade and backtrack and
Hmm.
not be confrontational, but yeah, it's a
Yeah.
concern.
Wow. So what are the moose encounter tips? Is it just like you like slowly back away?
You actually probably want to back away pretty fast. So
Oh,
moose they're herbivores, they're not predators, so they
right.
don't have a prey drive, so you're not going to trigger them by running. You should
Mm-hmm.
literally just get out of the way, get away.
Gotcha.
And then, if a moose is really close to you, which does happen, they're big and they're very
Hmm.
powerful, but they're not the smartest. So
Hmm.
apparently what works pretty well is trying to get a tree between you and the moose and
Um,
just kind of, play hide and seek, and
yeah.
eventually it'll lose interest.
Yeah.
So there was one racer a few years ago who ended up getting trampled by a moose. And he was very, very lucky because this happened just off the hard pack trail and deep
Wow.
unconsolidated powder. And so every time the moose stomped down on him, he just got pushed deeper into the snowpack
Oh,
and didn't end up with any serious injuries and also
wow.
didn't suffocate. And he just walked away with a massive scare.
Wow. Gosh, that's wild. I've only seen like scary, like people's videos of people in probably parks, like getting too close to try
Yeah.
and get a photo of a moose, right? Okay, so I want to be mindful of your time here too. So I think, so well, a couple things. one, what's coming up on the calendar for you now, like the rest of the year? We're recording this in July 2024. What's on the docket for you?
So I like VLDs, as I said, very long distances. And last fall, I tried to set a speed record on the Arizona Trail, which is an 800-mile trail going from the border of Utah down to the border of Mexico. And I think I will go back to reattempt that. I had to drop out last year because I sustained a stress fracture. So that actually hampered me in my training for the ITI, which is a different story. But I'm injury free at this point, and yeah, I'd like to take some of the lessons from the ITI and apply those to the Arizona Trail.
Amazing. Very cool. And temperature wise, very different, right?
Very different. So, I mean, the Arizona Trail covers everything from 2,000 feet above sea level to 10,000 feet above sea level in Arizona in the desert. So, you know, last year when I tried it, I was trudging through a blizzard for a little while at probably 22 degrees. And then I had warm days that were in the 60s and 70s.
Wow. Well, 22 degrees is going to be nothing for you after doing the ITI.
Exactly.
Easy breezy. Goodness. Okay. So actually, before we find out where we can find you, we have to do our Two Truths and Lie reveal. So you said you're terrible at injury prevention, you love training, and that you're a lazy athlete. We said that you are not a lazy athlete. We think that's a lie. Which one was your lie?
My lie is that I love training.
Oh,
I really don't enjoy it. I like
Yes.
adventures, but I really don't enjoy it. And so my truth is, yes, I am a lazy athlete. And in some ways, I think that actually helps me in those extreme long distances because I will exert the absolute minimum effort that I can get away with. And that allows me to go for a really, really long time.
Amazing. Efficient. You make it, efficient. So you don't love training. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, is it like, do you have someone programming for you? Do you do your own programming? What is that like?
I do my own programming, and really what that means is I try to squeeze in primarily like, you know, zone 2 cardio wherever I can around running 3 businesses and, you know, doing other things and guiding and being on adventures.
Yeah.
And I don't really enjoy the process. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, you know, running half marathons and marathons and not enjoying the physical aspect of it, but really only enjoying the mental and psychological element of these adventures. So training to me is, if it doesn't come in the form of a micro adventure, I get bored. It's just too physical.
Yeah. I feel like you should write a book, like like a biography or something. Like, I feel like you would have a really cool book to read. I think it would be fascinating. So put that on the to-do list one day. I would read your book. Okay. So you tell us a little bit about the terrible at injury prevention. So that is in fact true.
It's very, very true. And, you know, I mentioned that I got a stress fracture on the Arizona Trail last year. Well, that is a result of both my truth and my lie here. It's because I hate training and I'm terrible at injury prevention. I essentially try to go and, you know, do the Arizona Trail more or less off the couch. I run multiple guiding businesses, and so I was very, very busy. I didn't really have time to put miles down. And I really hadn't been running or distance hiking, you know, for over a year, I think. Or maybe since the last short Iditarod, which had happened that March. And then come early November, I'm trying to go and do 50 miles a day for, you know, 15 days in a row. And shocker, I got injured on day 4.
Oh, shoot.
You know, that was kind of predictable, I think.
Oh, man. So do you feel like, are you getting better at your injury, like prevention routine?
Yes and no. You know, I understand that the mind is not the only tool you need to be successful out there. And I think that getting injured on the Arizona Trail was actually the first time that I really acutely reached a physical limit that I knew was a risk, but I kind of figured I could probably get away with because most of the time I can get away with a lot of things. And just knowing that, you know, I too am subject to the same rules and laws that all of us are subject to, that has been helpful in trying to dial my balance between, you know, stretching, strength workout, mobility workouts, and, you know, just dialing up the training a little bit, even though I don't like it, with the actual adventure time.
Nice. Amazing. Well, this has been an amazing episode. I super appreciate all your nuggets. I think we learned how to evade a moose, which was something I never thought we'd learn on the Sports Nutrition podcast. So that's a fun one for sure. Where can people find you, follow you? Maybe tell us a little bit about your adventure company too. People can check you out there.
I try to be pretty active on social media, primarily Instagram, and that's just my first initial last name. So that's Stroeer. You'll have to look it up in the show notes. My parents tried to make it difficult. But I also run 2 guide companies. One of them is a kind of desert hiking, mostly day trip, overnight trip type of company called Dreamland Safari Tours. And you can find us on the web under dreamlandtours.net. And then I run a women-only mountaineering and backcountry expedition company. That's called AW Expeditions, AW Expeditions, and we focus on, high altitude, kind of glacier mountaineering, that sort of thing, as well as doing a couple of backpacking trips every year.
Amazing. That sounds so fun. Field trip.
Come on down.
Awesome. Yes. That sounds amazing. Well, thank you again, Sunny, so much for joining us. This has been so fun and very inspiring listen, I'm sure, for our listeners and myself.
Well, thank you, Kyla. Thanks for having me. I love being on the show.
Amazing.